Hey everybody, this is Erica, the technology nerd who likes to film stuff, and I am in France. And while I have gotten in France, I have acquired the Z1 Compact. I have the pink version. I just couldn't resist. I had to get something in pink. I always get something that looks masculine, and all my phones so far have been pretty much masculine. So this one is now dubbed Patricia. Opening up Patricia, I've already spent a couple of days with her. So I want to do a bit of an unboxing and an overview, kind of a first impressions video about the Z1 Compact, which I had a chance to look at when I was at CES in Vegas just this past month in January. So opening her up, you got, standard fare such as your earbud replacements. You've got your earbuds here, standard USB cable. Now what's really nice of Sony is that they have included a USB host adapter. This is something that I really haven't seen included in a box before. So for example, just say that you want to plug in a USB drive, like a flash drive, and you can expand storage this way. So thanks Sony, that was nice. And you've got your wall charger. Unfortunately, we don't have this in the United States. So if you pick one of these guys up from something like Negri Electronics or Amazon, you're going to have to use some type of an adapter. And then you've got all the other packets of information, putting all that aside. And just so you know, this adapter is 1.5 amps. Now what fascinated me about this device is the size of it, especially when considering something like the iPhone 5 or iPhone 5S. Now as some of you may know, I am a very tiny little person and I've got teeny little hands, and sometimes it's nice for me just to have a phone that's relatively small, but at the same time I'd like to have a powerful phone. So the Z1 Compact doesn't cut around any corners, it's just like the Z1, except for it's got a much smaller form factor, and lining them up you can see it's only a little bit thicker than the iPhone 5S, and just ever so slightly taller, and just a bit thicker as well, but it's quite manageable. And in hand I have found it to feel very solid. I really enjoy holding it. It doesn't get cumbersome over time, especially because it has these rounded edges. That's one thing I do complain about the iPhone. It gets a little bit sharp after a while. So I do like the design decision here. It does feel a little bit hefty though. So it is indeed a small phone, but in comparison to some of the other phones on the market, even with a 5-inch display, it weighs about the same. Now while this phone feels great in hand, I noticed that the bezels are a little bit thick, and that's something that makes me a bit cranky. One thing that I really like about the iPhone 5S is that it's got a very small form factor, but at least with my itty-bitty little thumbs, I can easily reach all the way across the display, where I find that added bezel makes it just a little bit harder. But for people with normal-sized hands, I think that this will be just fine for you. If you can get over the fact that the bezels are a little bit thicker than we would like them to, that screen just looks a little bit boxed in. The other thing that really attracted me to this phone is that it has a lot of LTE bands. This is a phone that's not going to be released in the United States as far as I know, but it actually does have the LTE band that works on AT&T and T-Mobile. So as I travel a lot, especially back and forth to France and other European countries, this is great for me. Once I get back home in the United States, I have LTE. Yay! So taking a look around the phone, we have all of the openings on the left-hand side. We've got the USB charging port right here, micro USB. We've got a micro SD card slot, and we've also got the SIM card slots. That's a micro SIM. Of course, make sure that they are closed very well at all times so that this stays waterproof. And I do like at the beginning when you're setting up this phone, if any flap is open, the phone is happy to oblige and to tell you, hey, the flap's open, make sure to keep these flaps closed. So it's really no excuse. And we've also got a place for pogo charging pins for a proprietary charger from Sony, which I will never buy. On the right-hand side, we have the power button and volume rocker. I do notice that the volume rocker is a little bit awkward, sometimes a little hard to press. But I think that the power button is boosted upward just a tiny bit, so when I press it, it's actually in a very convenient location. I haven't had any issues with that. And also, the thing that I love is the dedicated camera key. This is something that you just don't have on pretty much every other phone that I have seen lately. And since this is a waterproof phone, it's really convenient because if you take it underneath the water, even though you won't be able to use that capacitive touchscreen, you can still take pictures or at least activate video. We've got a standard headphone jack up top. We've got the speaker and microphone on the bottom, which I notice is very easy to obstruct. If I'm watching video content or if I'm playing games, unfortunately, I see it's just so easy to get my palm right on there. So that's a little bit of a bummer in the design. On the back here, we have a 20.7 megapixel camera. We've also got a single LED flash. You can see the NFC logo right here, so there is NFC inside this phone. On the front, we have a 2 megapixel front-facing camera. And we have a 4.3-inch IPS display. Finally, we have a better display from the Z, the Z1, the Z1S. They all have the same display where the viewing angles are just terrible and they really wash out at any angle other than just head-on. So finally, this is a decent display. So getting into the specifications, what we have here is essentially a Z1 or a Z1S. They're all basically the same phone. Even the Z Ultra, they all have the exact same specifications pretty much, despite the camera here. So we've got a Qualcomm Snapdragon 800 processor inside of here, clocked at 2.2 gigahertz, 2 gigabytes of RAM, and we've got the Adreno 330 GPU. So this guy really does not cut corners. In comparison to something like the Z1 or the Z1S or the Z Ultra, it's incredibly snappy. I have no complaints about the performance whatsoever. Gameplay so far has been really great. So finally, a little teeny phone that has all the power under the hood that you could possibly want. Now in terms of the interface, unfortunately, we are stuck on Android 4.3. It's kind of insulting to see that this phone was released with 4.3 when a lot of the other phones released are coming out on KitKat. But at least Sony promises very soon to release KitKat, and I do believe them, because on my Xperia Z Ultra, I get so many updates. Sony's pretty good about getting those updates out, so I'm not too worried here. What I like about Sony as compared to some other manufacturers is that they have pretty mild customization, pretty mild skinning. It's not something like TouchWiz that's completely in the way, so pretty minimalistic overall. But I do like that they add a personalization setting so that you can add certain themes. They do have some nice power-saving options, such as their stamina mode. When you turn it on, it turns off Wi-Fi when the screen is off, and other background data processes, but at least you can go in and add certain applications that you do want to continue functioning while in stamina mode. And you can also decide at what point you want the stamina mode to turn on, whether it's always on or just say hitting 30%. So this is something that I have used and something that I really did like on the Z Ultra. So it's on this guy as well. I do have to say though that I don't find it all that necessary to use the stamina mode on this phone because this phone has pretty awesome battery life. I am very easily able to get through the day without any issues whatsoever. I was able to use the phone pretty heavily. You can see it's almost going on for a day here. And I'm almost able to get 6 hours of screen time. Now the argument goes by several people, imagine how well it can do when you have it in stamina mode. You're cheating a little bit, but you can see that you should be just fine in terms of battery. We've also got X-Reality for mobile underneath display settings. This is something that I've kind of had a little bit of a fight with. It's not so nice. It makes a lot of images look kind of blocky, distorted. So if you're watching something like YouTube videos or even Netflix streaming, you start seeing edges of objects in content that you're watching look pretty blocky, so it's something that I tend to keep off. It also boosts the saturation a little bit. But hey, whatever floats your boat, you're free to try it out. I have more to comment about the display in a moment, but we also have glove mode here. So if you want to add a little bit more sensitivity, you're free to do so, especially out in the cold. And we've also got an interesting setting for white balance. I haven't had too much of a chance to play around with this yet. But basically you can boost the red, the greens, or the blues, just depending on what you like the white balance to appear like. So I'll play around with that more and get back to you on that. Now talking a little bit more about the display, it's 342 pixels per inch, it's 720p, so it's not 1080p like a lot of the other flagships out, but it's been plenty sharp to me. And for viewing content, I have found 4.3 inches to be just fine. But I do have some things to say about the display. I want to show you a little bit of what's going on with the calibration. Now, just taking a basic look at some measurements, the first thing that I could see with this display is that it's just too contrasty. That means that the gamma is just too high. And when the gamma is too high, especially where it is, which is in the midtones, which would be where faces are, all the way into shadows, it really messes around with the details that you can see in the image. So what's happening is that you're losing detail in shadows, so a lot of details in an image end up looking kind of blacked out. Or in layman's terms, some images are just looking too dark. This also applies in video. So when watching movies and Netflix, I notice it becomes a little bit bothersome for me, especially in darker scenes, as I just can't see any details anymore. So I think that they went really overboard here. They have done this for quite some time. On the Z Ultra I noticed it, but here it's just so much worse. Where this will affect you most is if you are taking pictures, for example. So you need to be able to see what you're looking at. And unfortunately, when you're taking pictures, some details just look too dark, so you can never get the correct composition. The other things that I'm noticing is that the colors are a little bit off, and that the white balance of the display is incredibly blue, which you can remedy a little bit by messing around with the white balance settings. Thank you, Sony, that was very nice of you. So it's a nice IPS display, but they did go a little bit overboard with the calibration. Another thing about this display is that the dynamic contrast is driving me bananas. During certain content, you can really see the brightness changing or the whole behavior of the display. So just say you're looking at a web page, for example, you touch the address bar, it gets a lot more dim, and it goes brighter. Touch it again, goes dimmer. So during gameplay, this tends to be really frustrating, especially if you have something with brighter areas, and then you go into an area that's not so bright, you really see the display doing a lot of wonky things. That's something that I wish that could be disabled. I do remember on the Xperia Z Ultra that they had it right. I think it was on the Z1 as well. There was a setting underneath display that was called Optimize Backlight, and when you turned Optimize Backlight on, you would see all the crazy things with dynamic contrast, but once you checked it off, it seemed to not be a problem. But Sony had a lot of issues with that and a lot of complaints, because if you were to restart your phone without the optimized backlight setting on, it would sit and hang on the booting screen for several minutes. You'd think that the device had major problems or something with it, and finally after several minutes it would boot. So that was something they were not able to sort out. Now they just removed the optimized backlight setting, and we're stuck with that crazy dynamic contrast. So that's a bit unfortunate. The final thing that I want to talk a bit about for now until I get to my full review is some things with the camera. Now I showed you before we have a camera button here, a dedicated camera key, which is really nice. And there's a lot of bells and whistles to mess around with in this camera. You've got an interesting superior auto mode, but it's unfortunate that it can only be used in 8 megapixels. You've got a manual mode, and there's a lot of really nice settings under here. You can see that you have an HDR setting. You can tick that on, but the problem is that you can only use that with 8 megapixels when the sensor itself is 20.7 megapixels, so that's something to keep in mind. What's been bothering me about this camera is that even though it's 20.7 megapixels, I have to wonder why, or what's the point of even using it at 20.7 megapixels at times, because there's some areas of images that are softer than others. So instead of everything being very sharp in an image that you take, you have several spots that just don't look as sharp as others, and it tends to really degrade the overall experience of that picture. It's not all bad though. Some images come out looking really nice. The colors are kind of hit and miss. That's one thing that I notice. Some images have colors that look pretty pleasant and others don't. So overall, I think that the camera can be kind of unreliable in that respect. Also, during videos, I noticed that if you were recording people, faces, it does have a face detection mode, and even if you were to be recording yourself, the focus tends to bounce around here and there. I'm not sure why it doesn't just lock focus on a face once it finds it and stay there. So that has been something that has annoyed me quite a bit. Though you do have a pretty killer AR mode. You can see this dinosaur just wandering around in my environment, so that's pretty cool. But it doesn't make up for the fact that this camera does have some issues here and there. One thing that people have been asking me is if my device exhibits the flash bleed issue. This is an issue that I am seeing posted all over the web. Apparently when you take a picture, for some of these devices, it seems that the flash is leaking into the camera itself. In some parts of the image you can see it looks totally washed out. So that is an issue that I haven't been seeing, but one that I have been seeing that's kind of an annoying one is if you were to take pictures in the dark, just say something that's far distance, if you have it underneath the superior auto mode, it ends up really screwing up with the white balance. You can see that the whole image is just entirely blue. When I went under manual mode though, it was just fine. But overall it yields the best result with just not using a flash in the darkness. I'm not really sure why you would want to shoot at a distance in the dark with a flash anyway. It's not like that flash can do anything great in particular. So for some of you, this might look familiar. I want to do more testing with this and see what's really going on here. But non-fail, anytime I was using the superior auto mode with flash, you get this. So far I've only had a couple of days to play around with this phone. I will be doing a full review on this guy, or this girl by now, excuse me, Patricia. I will be doing a full review on Patricia. There are some things that I am not so happy with, but what's going to keep this phone in my pocket is the fact that it's got really great battery life in my opinion. And it's got that pretty much global LTE that's just fantastic. So we're just gonna have to see how it goes. Right, Patricia? Right. So thank you everybody for watching. This has been Erica, the technology nerd who likes to film stuff. Please rate, comment, and subscribe. I'm going to take some more time to play around with Patricia, get more well acquainted, and I will be back with you soon. Have a good night!